Hi there, this is Rachel Stone introducing Transformational Leadership, all elements of leadership, but especially transformational leadership, which includes learning to be a coach while you're a leader. All coaches are leaders, but not all leaders are coaches. And my mission is to help solve that. I hope you enjoy. I'm joined by Sharon Curry, who is managing partner at the Trusted Executive. She's also a co-chair on the fellowship board, and she's an executive coach with years of experience. And today we're looking at habit number 6, which comes under our second pillar, integrity. And we're talking about choosing to be humble. This one can be a hot potato. So I'm going to start by asking you then, Sharon, what would you say is a good definition for choosing to be humble?
There's any number of aspects to what humility is to me, and especially in a leadership role, but it's servant leadership, meaning that it's prioritizing the needs of the team and the organization over the individual. That's fundamentally when you're looking at it from a business sense, which we are in this context with leadership. And it's all about your self awareness, recognizing your potential tendencies, your ego, recognizing your limitations and your strengths, of course, valuing or appreciating others, recognizing their contributions that they're making, and not taking credit for other people's work is an act of humility. But we do see that out there where people take credit for other people's work. Letting go of control, delegating to people, that's an act of humility. I don't know everything, and other people know a lot. So I need to be able to let go of control and grow them and offer them opportunities. So all of those things wrapped in make up a part of that habit of being humble.
That's a really fantastic summary around quite a lot of areas in the habit of being humble. And I think when you think about the opposite of what being humble is, it's being arrogant. And there are many successful people who have remained successful and being arrogant. So, how can we talk to that point in our discussion today?
I relate arrogance to that ego, and the stronger and more powerful the ego is, the more arrogant the person can appear. And I think that really that self awareness is key, because when your ego is making decisions for you as opposed to your calm, centered, authentic self, then you're not necessarily making the right decisions. Obviously, there's a place and a necessary place for leaders to take a stance, to make decisions, but it can't be the every moment stance. They have to recognize the abilities and the strengths of their team and place the team first and the organization first and ahead of them. And arrogance doesn't tend to do that. Arrogance tends to sit on the scale of I'm right, as opposed to that's interesting. There's other perspectives. I'm curious about that. It's very interesting, the ego and the arrogance piece, because sometimes I think as leaders move up the ladder, they can get disconnected from the reality and actually start to believe the environment that is being created around them, a deferential environment, that they're the expert environment. And if you sit in that position for too long, you're losing touch with reality, I think.
Yes, and also there's that famous old phrase, pride comes before a fall. And I know that in the work of Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, if you've got a very arrogant, everything within themselves and owning it all as if it's all because of them, the minute they step away, nothing's sustainable. There is no continuation. There's certainly no development of other people. And also, a person who's predominantly in that state of mind doesn't hear things that they may need to hear, because people might think if somebody's not open for discussion or not open for new ideas or not open for those things around giving somebody else the chance to shine, then they're not going to put those ideas forward and they're going to withhold it themselves. And eventually people do leave because they're not allowed to have a moment that they can flourish in. So I think we've talked about being humble, and the opposite is arrogance. And being humble is something people that are level 5 leaders who are at the pinnacle of their leadership skills. They trust others. They give others the credit when things go well. They take responsibility when everything goes wrong. They say, that's my bad. Always think about the person who's pointing. When someone's pointing that way, there's 3 fingers pointing back. So owning those areas. I think there's some good examples of people in our pop culture. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and Jurgen Klopp is often cited as somebody who's very humble. You listen to his analysis and he says, oh, the team did really well. It's that kind of attitude that builds trust. People feel they can flourish. They look up to somebody who is humble, even though the person who's been looked up to is the last thing they desire. I really like the phrase in Dr. John Blakey's work around when you meet a truly humble leader, it's the impression they leave with you afterwards, the thing that you take away with you It's not that brash harshness that you feel. It's something with a kind of awe and reverence where you feel moved by that person because they are humble. It's almost like it's counterintuitive. They're inspiring because almost they're not inspiring in a way.
I read your blogs that you put up in preparation for this, and you were talking about charisma, which is really interesting because that charisma is not necessarily about arrogance. That's a state, and people are influenced by you and they want to follow you. If you have that humility as well, that just makes that charismatic state even more powerful.
It would be a good multiplier, wouldn't it? The charisma, the inspirational nature of someone who is humble. They can have charisma, but when it's that brush, ego centered charisma that is all about the I instead of the we, it's just not got longevity.
It's almost like it's a practiced charisma, that one. The other one is an understated presence. A dominant ego that makes leaders blind to their own faults. And that's a dangerous position to be in.
In my experience, I've noticed companies that I've either researched or worked with, what happens where you have somebody who is very competitive, very into winning on a personal level, they're driven by their own personal results. They want to strive to achieve their success. They do add great result, they do deliver, but they're not doing it for the team. They're doing it for themselves. And someone in that role who gets good results, they deliver, they meet all their KPIs, they're really outstanding in their performance of a role, but they're not doing it for the team. It creates this atmosphere. It creates a them and us. And I
Yeah.
think that's never going to build trust. And everyone knows those people. Everyone knows who they are. And it doesn't build a culture of trust.
Yeah. And when there is no culture of trust and when there is a leader that you're describing, teams become less willing to collaborate in those environments. And because their ideas, when they come forward, they're not valued or they're not championed, or we'll talk about the habit of evangelizing, about shouting out about the strengths of the team, not shouting out about my strengths as a leader.
Mm.
We won this, we were successful here because of the team effort, because of collaboration. So teams become less willing when they put forward their ideas and maybe their ideas are taken or not paid attention to. And leaders who lack humility can often find themselves isolated. People are reluctant to approach them and they're reluctant to challenge them because they can't guarantee what the response is going to be. Or perhaps they can guarantee that response is going to be quite a closed down, I know what's right, the non humble approach.
And I think it links back to if somebody is consistently not going to listen to you and is not going to give you a feeling of being valued, but they're going to take the credit for your work, where is the relationship there? And where is the incentive to be your best if somebody else is going to be the person that steals all of that? In my limited life experience, and I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I've often encountered people in that genre of they must win at all costs and it must be about them. Often I feel that they're trying to make up for something that they feel insecure about and therefore striving to be something that they feel they should be. And if they were only to learn some more self awareness and to be a bit more open and strive to be a little bit more humble, they would find that they get more effective results and they feel better about themselves.
I think some leaders fear that humility, if they show they're humble, it might be perceived as a lack of confidence or a lack of decisiveness. And therefore, there are some tensions here. It's not necessarily that a leader is arrogant on purpose. It's just that there are a lot of fears that come along with that lonely at the top leadership role. And that's one of them. I have to be seen to be decisive. I have to be seen to have confidence. And if I'm humble, maybe that will be perceived in the wrong way.
Go to justtheexecutive.com and look for the free downloadable tool for yourself to check how would you rate yourself. And I love these questions around choosing to be humble. And you rate yourself from never along the scale to always. And the questions start with, when things go well, I am willing to let others take the praise. And that always reminds me of that famous quote by Lao Tzu, who says a leader is great when the work is done and everyone looks around and they say, we did it by ourselves. I've paraphrased it there. But people feel they've achieved and the leader sits quietly in the background. And that's why I love the power of coaching. It brings this out in people. If you're a leader listening in here, how would you grade yourself on that? And then when things go badly, I am willing to take personal responsibility. Hands up, I made that mistake. Or even if it's got nothing to do with you, I'll take the flak for that. And we often see this in government, don't we, when the ministers called to resign over this atrocious piece of poor conduct, etc. And how many of those people are willing to stand up and say, I'll take the rap for that? And those people that can do that are showing real modeling of there's something that's gone wrong. I was in that leadership role. I got the capacity to make this better. But if it's down to me, I must make it right. Interestingly, in the book, there's some talk about how do you get forgiveness for not being humble? If you make a mistake and you've not been humble, how can you get people to be forgiving of you? And one of the things that John Blakey talks about is that showing that you've had the unnecessary amount of suffering personally. And it sounds out of sync from what we're talking about today, but in order to come back from this, and you need to make recompense for that. What are the steps? It's really hard. But there are great case studies of this. People do step up and say, okay, that was me. I will take the rap for that. And then people do move and they shift. There's a transition in how they feel about that leader. So that's number two. And number three on the self assessment tool, others would describe me as a very humble person. It's very hard to be able to say that about yourself. Take this downloadable tool, do the assessment yourself, and ask a trusted person to help you with the difference between how you perceive yourself and then how other people see you.
It's very interesting, but in the research that John did and with the majority of the teams that we work with, the integrity pillar, leaders at the top tend to mark themselves very strongly in that integrity pillar when they're doing a self assessment for honesty, for openness, and for humility. They rate themselves high. And to a person, I would say probably taking aside some of our fellowship board members, because they are some of the most humble, fantastic leaders I've ever come across. So taking them aside, but others that we work with, when they use that self assessment as a 360, or even using the Leadership Trust Index, the largest survey that we do with organizations, and they get that 360 feedback from their organization, their openness, honesty, and humility is ranked significantly lower by members of their teams. So there's definitely a spot there in the pillar of integrity where everybody will say, well, of course I'm humble. But even by saying, of course I'm humble, how humble is that? I ranked myself a 3 on that because I can be decisive and I can take charge. And I'm a person that when things get a bit stressy, I like to grab control to make my world safe. But then I have to go and apologize for that later and say, this is how I was feeling and probably shouldn't have done that. So that's where I can maybe recuperate. But it's a learning curve for a lot of people, that humility habit.
And I think that's why this links quite nicely to when we talked about the coaching habit, having a culture of feedback, being able to pass on helpful information to help somebody with their self awareness. And I've been in organizations that help them learn coaching skills to develop their management and leadership teams and the transition that takes place. I know I have a joke and I always say, especially in all my slides and everything when we do the training, it's all about the feedback. And then when people have done the training, because they say, is it okay for us to give you some feedback? But what we're saying is, yes, it is okay, because actually self awareness is the starting place. Once you can understand yourself more effectively, then you're more interested and curious about other people's self. And then when you've got those open lines of communications with that habit of being open, you can build up an environment where people learn that perhaps that wasn't very humble. And I remember not so long ago when one of my other favourite heroes, Damien Hughes, said that he would write the foreword for my book. I put a post on LinkedIn and it was a bit boasty. And I suddenly thought, oh, that's not very nice. So I did another post and I said, I didn't actually mean it to come out like that. I was just so thrilled for myself that it came over as not very humble. I was like, yay, I've got this great guy and he's going to write this thing for my book. But actually, it was not very nice to write that. But it suddenly dawned on me that people have looked at that. So I had to repair that damage. It's a joint effort.
Yeah, it's a fine balance. There's definitely a tension between the habit of humility and the habit of evangelize. But the things that organizations need to do, definitely what you were saying about the ethos of coaching, where you're asking, not telling. That means that you're open to ideas, you're open to listening. And you also mentioned environments which have continuous learning and development, those that help leaders to maintain humility. There's the elements of don't praise humility or don't have it as one of your values or don't talk about it if you're just going to provide bonuses for the results. So when you're looking at this and you're looking at recognition systems, a lot of organizations, they talk a lot of great words and values, but then they don't reward people when they're coming up with things like that collaboration and sharing and the team ethos. So be careful of that because your systems need to recognize and reward not just the results. And again, some of our members on our fellowship boards are absolutely fantastic at doing this within their organizations.
In the book by Stephen Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, he goes into an organization and he always does these great stories around these case studies. And he was saying that he was talking to the leader who was complaining about his team and how they weren't helping each other. And on the wall was the bonus system. And the bonus was the person who wins the most personally gets to go on the holiday type thing. And it just didn't sync up. the image I have in my head is a first past the post competition where the guy in the case study has pictures of everybody's heads on the horses, and the one in the lead is the one that goes on the holiday. So it's totally counterintuitive to having a humble atmosphere where everyone's collaborating and they're being for the we, not the I. And I remember when I was teaching A-level business studies, we had a case study around the Enron collapse. And one of the huge pieces in that was about self-interest, making decisions on how you personally gain. There's certainly not a culture of humility in there. It was about I am the winner, sod all of you lot. We can't exist like that. Not only do people need to be open, but companies are now very much more open from a data point of view. You can ask for freedom of information, or you can track people's information down and find out just exactly what is going on. You can't have a poster on the wall with all these values if it doesn't tie up with everything else that's aligned in the vision and the mission and the values. Some interweaving threads all crossing over as we've discovered, as we've talked these through. I absolutely loved that book by Jim Collins, and it actually prompted me to pay to go and see him live. And I was so fascinated by the fact that he said a slow, steady march. And he stood there and described this unassuming, steadfast, diligent character that he'd researched time and time again. Not the high flyer, not the flamboyant, gung ho. Yes, there is a place for some motivational speaking, but he was saying this diligent, steadfast, trustworthy person who is there for the organization. And I often think with governments and schools, heads of schools, and some companies, the short termism that people are measured by short term results rather than more substantially long flow, for example, investment decisions, schemes, structures. When we've got that humility, it's not about the quick win, it's about the win. Everybody wins.
I think you need to be careful about branding any type of leader. We love gung ho, we love charismatic, we love all kinds of leadership, but it's all about the balance. Leaders must balance humility with the courage to make tough decisions and take a stand if they need to. But in order to be able to do that, they have to have built an environment of trust, both in immediate teams and in their organization, because that's what allows them to take a stand and make tough decisions and still maintain their humility.
And that's great because we have got the habit of being brave, and none of these habits exist in isolation. And that's where you get these bits of tension. It's about understanding the appropriateness of the delivery of these behaviors that get the right results at the right time.
Oh, in the beginning, we're thinking, oh, humility, that's a tough one. Actually, no, there's lots to be said about humility.
And great because you look at it from your perspective with your experience. And I love the fact that you've had experience in the armed forces. And here you are talking about a different culture that is about building up these relationships through not crisis type management, with authoritarian rule of culture in the armed forces that exists at times.
It's a misconception. Military tends to be a very coaching organization. It's come a long way since the days of Nelson when I was in.
Mm.
But
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when all the people that came back from their posts in the war and they built up these companies, all they knew was their military experience. And it's like my granddad, he started a business after his service in the army. Had no idea, but he did have some other great skills that kept him afloat, swings and roundabouts. So thank you so much for today. We are coming on to our third pillar, which is benevolence, and we will be starting with evangelize. So that'll be really exciting, and it's not what you think. Thanks ever so much for joining me, and wish you all the best for the rest of your day.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Bye.